Ina Hassani, she's Director of Sales and Business Development at LiveGen, and she's going to talk to us about how to unlock innovation with OBAs. Ina?
All right. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. It's so nice to see some familiar faces and connecting with some new people as well. It's been great. So today we've been talking about outcome-based agreements. We've been talking about it for quite some time in Canada, but their adoption in certain countries is far more advanced than others. And so today we're going to deep dive into how the uptake of OBAs has been in Canada compared to certain other countries. And as well, what are the key learnings that we can take from the global experience as we're building frameworks and access pathways, which are a great opportunity for OBAs to be implemented in the Canadian landscape. Before that, just a quick introduction of LiveGen. I'm pretty sure that most of you don't know who we are, and it's normal. We've been in the Canadian space for a couple months now. We're based out of Switzerland. We're a software and a health tech company. Our technology is mainly specialized in market access, and more specifically in the pricing negotiation and the PLA adjudication. So a lot of the data you'll see today are based out of LiveGen library, which is based off of information that is publicly available. So there are certain limitations, but I think there's some really good indicators on the OBA uptake. And in addition to that, we've been working for quite some time now with payers and industry in Europe, specifically in the implementation of OBA. So we'll give you a little bit of the insights we've gathered over the past few years. So I was reading the New York Times the other day, and there's this article about the golden age of new therapies. And they were making the point that with mRNA, AI, 3D printing, there's so much innovation, and it's coming at a faster pace than ever. And we've seen it with the past few years. We had some great breakthrough therapies in oncology, rare disease that have changed the lives of patients. But I think this pace will keep going, and we're going to see more and more. However, these breakthrough therapies sometimes come with a certain level of uncertainty. It can be the limitation on the clinical data because of the feasibility of phase 3 trials. It can come with uncertainty around the societal outcomes of these products. And when you combine that with a high-cost drug, it creates a big question mark. And oftentimes, that question mark, from a payer perspective, can lead to delays in reimbursement and limited access to breakthrough therapies for patients. And this is where outcome-based agreements are a great tool. We talk a lot about time to reimbursement being essential for patients' outcomes, but it's also essential for our industry. Yesterday, at the opening, that was a great point where, as an industry, we're trying to make the Canadian market as attractive and relevant as possible at the global scale. So time to reimbursement is key. So in a situation where we have uncertainty, OBAs can be a great tool, a strategic partnership between payers and manufacturers to reduce that level of uncertainty and share the risk in order to enable access in a timely manner. And there's 3 main circumstances that have been proven to be ideal for the implementation of OBAs. The first one is the variable therapeutic response. So whenever there's a drug is more efficacious in certain subpopulation or specific population, where there's limited clinical data. I think we've seen a lot of that with phase 3 trial not being feasible. And whenever there's a disagreement between payer and manufacturers on the level of the value that a drug is bringing to the patients, to the healthcare system. But before we take a look at the OBA uptake globally and in Canada, I wanted to take a bigger picture on the situation we're trying to tackle right now with innovation. So when we look at the drug expenditure per capita, Canada ranks 4th amongst OECD countries. And we also know, on the other hand, that about 20% of new drugs make it to the Canadian public plans. So clearly, there's something that the payers are, unfortunately, try to tackle. There's a tough balancing act between sustainability of the healthcare system, so how to manage drug plans, make sure that the healthcare system is stable over time, and on the other hand, how to integrate innovation within the healthcare system and how to make breakthrough therapies available to patients as soon as possible. And when it comes to the timelines, we know, and this has been mentioned multiple times, so I'm not, multiple times during the sessions, we've heard many times that in Canada it takes about 2 years on average for therapies to be reimbursed on the public side after Health Canada approval. And that positions us last in the G7, and it's double the time than other OECD countries. There's also a big difference between the public reimbursement timeline and the private. And that raises a lot of questions on the equity of care and accessibility of care of breakthrough therapies and innovative therapies as well. And when we're looking at 2 examples of therapeutic areas, and specifically oncology and rare disease, which we've seen a lot of new treatments coming in that have changed the lives of patients over the past few years, we see also a lot of delays in terms of a reimbursement. So 90% of CDA reviews of oncology product are completed within 10 months. However, when we're looking at the reviews that are done between 2021 and 2023, none of them have reached the target timeline of 180 days. And once you've completed the review and you have a positive recommendations, it takes 6 to 7 months with PCPA negotiations. On the rare disease side, 60% of new treatments are available, make it to the Canadian market. And when they make it, it takes about 6 years compared to US and Europe. And so that balancing act between budgets and affordability and timeline to access, many other countries around the world have utilized outcome-based agreement to tackle this situation. And this is why we see over the past 10 years quite an extensive uptake of the outcome-based agreements year over year. And when we're looking at the distribution of outcome-based agreements implemented in different therapeutic areas, without surprise, oncology and rare disease are the ones that are standing out the most. Right now, globally, we've identified about 535 outcome-based agreements that have been implemented worldwide. And again, we all know that these agreements are so sensitive and highly confidential. So the number here, I would take it as an estimate and not as a clear number. But I think it's a really good indicator of the trends we're seeing and how the OBAs have been utilized by many payers and manufacturers to really enable access in a timely manner across the world. And I think this is a very also interesting slide where, without surprise, we know that on the public side, that's where we see the most, the highest number of outcome-based agreements and innovative agreements. However, we see a high increase of these innovative agreements also on the private side, and it's growing faster than on the public, at 60% year over year. So clearly, there's also a high interest on the private payer side to find solutions to manage their drug budgets and the expenditure, but as well making sure that they still remain to remain relevant in terms of in offering the highest value to the patients as well. So when we're looking at the distribution of and implemented outcome-based agreements across many countries, so here I wanted to compare where Canada stands amongst the PMPR, some of the PMPRB referencing countries. Here we don't have Norway and Japan data, but overall Canada ranks 6. It's not bad. But when we look at the global top 10, we are outside of that. US obviously leading the way, but UK, Italy, Spain are not too far behind as well. And the UK, Italy, and Spain are definitely pioneers, and especially in the HT context when it comes to the implementation of outcome-based agreements. However, I think it's worth for us to also acknowledge that a lot of work has been done in Canada the past few years. I think there's a lot of key advancement and access pathways that are getting there, and OBAs could be a great tool to be implemented during those specific situations. So we have INES with promesse de valeur thérapeutique, CDA with time-limited reimbursement recommendations. There's the Target 0 that is coming up soon, the PCP, a temporary access program, and so many more. There's also organizations and stakeholders are involved to help industry and the payers to make sure that we have the right framework and support to get those innovative thinking when it comes to price negotiation. And making sure that treatments are coming to Canada as soon as possible and being accessible to patients. So we have the Institute of Health Economics with the OBE Playbook, Montreal In Vivo, Value-Based Agreement Working Group, and that's just a few, but there's so much more that are working around that space. So definitely a lot of work has been done to pave the way and to put the framework in place. Now is just a time and a matter of moving forward and taking a risk and trying it out. But I think things are moving forward and going in that path after CDA. If some of you were there, they were talking about the tabletop exercise with OBAs. So that's going to be an interesting thing to look into in the future. Okay. And when we look at the global experience, such as Italy, UK, Spain, again, pioneers in this space, they've been doing it for quite some time now. There are some common trends and on how they utilize OBAs in their own system. So most of the time, it's within the framework of an early access program. They are, so Kymriah is a great example, for example, in Italy, where the drug was made available and reimbursed for patients after a regulatory approval. An OBA was in place at that time, and over time, as the uncertainty was diminishing because of the real-world evidence and the value proposition of the drug was made much clearer for the payer, then there was a renegotiation where they put in place a simpler type of agreement, such as a first dollar rebate with criteria like the ones we see mostly in Canada. But the outcome-based agreements was serving a very clear purpose, is to create certainty around a new breakthrough therapy, but also making sure that this product was available to patients as soon as possible because of the high unmet need in that space. And so there are those trends and the key learnings we're getting from the global experience. I put this in 2 buckets. The first bucket is the infrastructure, and the second one is the process. The infrastructure, we talk a lot about data, the quality of the data, the outcome, how we measure it, which one is the most relevant, and it is a big challenge, and especially in Canada. It's fragmented across jurisdictions, and it is sometimes even fragmented within jurisdictions. It's hard to have clean data sometimes to support those outcome-based agreements. But that is the basis and the foundation of it. And I know that a lot of the provinces are working towards that, centralizing EMRs and EHRs. So there's work that has been that it's happening right now in the back end. The other piece that is also very important is a digital system to operationalize those outcome-based agreements. So most of you know that PLAs, product listing agreements, currently are adjudicated through Excel spreadsheets on the private side and on the manufacturers. And it's kind of crazy to think that millions of dollars are currently just calculated through Excel spreadsheets on a quarterly, yearly basis for many, many years. But when it comes to outcome-based agreements, the operational cost of doing this type of innovative negotiations with, or PLAs, is very high. Who's going to track the data? How are we going to track it? For how long? Do you need to hire people? Who's going to calculate it? So the cost of doing and making it happen right now with the current infrastructure is very high. So from a scalability perspective, it's a big challenge for both ends, right? From an industry perspective and also at the payer level. So having a digital tool that is able to welcome the data, ingest the outcomes, and calculate everything automatically, that would be helpful. And I think it would elevate and make these OBAs much more scalable across the different provinces and jurisdictions. On the second bucket, we have the process. We are still new in that space. There are a couple of OBAs in Canada. We don't know a lot about it. It's still very confidential. But having the right framework and asking ourselves the right questions is also an important step, especially at early stages as we're building this expertise. And the reason why is because we want to get the most out of this agreements, right? We want to get the most value out of it. So knowing which are in which circumstances we want to implement an OBA, what type of products, at what time, and within the reimbursement process, who needs to be involved, et cetera, et cetera. It's very important questions that need answers for an optimal implementation of these type of agreements. And finally, like the Italy example with Kymriah, I think it's OBAs are not the end game. They are a tool, a moment in time to create certainty where there's a little of it, and to build confidence between payer and manufacturer around the value proposition of a product. So once we know what that value is, and when it's very clear for both ends, it just creates a table where a basis of a conversation to negotiate an agreement that is much more sustainable over time. And I'm going through this very fast, so hopefully you guys have questions after this. But in conclusion, what I would like to bring to the conversation is, like, at the end of the day, this is a collective mission. You need the buy-in of everyone, the patients, the payers on the public side, on the private side, the providers as well, to make it happen. So, and I believe also that OBAs are an innovation in itself. It's a different way of thinking, and it will shift the conversation from the price point of a product to the value of a product. We're not talking just of the price tag of it, but the value, what it's bringing to society and to the patients. Thank you. I'm welcoming any questions.
So questions for Ina? Yeah. Our mic people are out of practice.
It's only me out there, okay? Who was the question? All right, I got you. Right here.
Thank you. I was wondering about your thoughts on using PSP as part of the OBA
Yep.
challenges and opportunities?
So in Europe, in some circumstances, we've seen cases of the PSP. I have worked in that space for some times, and I do trust the data that is coming out there because it's based out of special authorization forms. But I know there's a lot of conversation on can the data be trusted, and there's a big, I think there's a conversation that needs to happen between manufacturer and the payer on the validity of that data and how it's captured, and an agreement for it. But I do believe that it's a great opportunity for it. Yeah, it's there, right? And it tackles a little bit of the big challenge of the scarcity sometimes of the outcomes.
The question as well.
Yes.
There was a slide that said that Canada ranks 6th
Yes.
among PMPRB reference countries in terms of implementation of OBAs. Can you just expand on that a little bit? And the graph seemed to show that, I don't know, there were maybe 15 or 16 OBAs. Is that what the graph was showing?
That's what we've captured so far right now. And again, when I looked at the data, these OBAs are mainly in oncology, like 80% of those. Very little information. And I've seen in literature in some of white papers that that number varies. I've seen 20, I've seen 10. We've captured 15, but mainly in the oncology space. And I would say that in terms of timing, the timelines, if I'm not mistaken, so it was between 2018 and 2023, most of them, which makes sense because there's a lot of access pathways that have changed over this past few years that perhaps has created the opportunity for these outcome-based agreements.
Yes, so you're saying the data comes just mainly from?
It's a public domain. So we gather, it's public domain.
Okay,
Mainly. Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, I think there's another question in the middle, yeah.
Sorry, it got turned off. Okay, so I guess just building on that a little bit, in my recollection of pre-pandemic timelines, there was a lot of conversation in Europe around OBAs, and they were really talking to people in that area about what an OBA was. They sound an awful lot like what we were already widely implementing in Canada, which is basically just rebate discount type agreements. So when you're looking at Canadian outcome-based agreements, you're talking about performance-based agreements or some form of clinical outcome that's being measured. Mm-hmm. And do you see that, you said that we're 6 internationally, but are we seeing more outcome-based agreements being implemented internationally as well now?
Absolutely. I think that especially in Europe and UAE also have made a decision, especially in oncology and rare disease, where the path forward for reimbursement is outcome-based agreements, and we have been doing a lot of work in that space on the payer side, but also industry, to put the infrastructure in place on a digital, from a digital perspective to enable those. So definitely a lot of demand, and I think it's going to increase, right? We see so many gene therapies are coming up, mRNA, therapies, those are often associated with high costs. And from that perspective, the outcome-based agreements are enablers. And keep in mind that yes, you might be looking at something that is with criteria and looking at discontinuation, for example, or survival rates in Europe. But at the end of the day, they're implementing that right after regulatory approval until they have further information and to renegotiate these products after. So they're making sure that breakthrough therapy are accessible as soon as possible to patients, and especially in areas where there's a very high and critical unmet need. And the OBAs are utilized in those situations.
I think we have another question over here. Elle peut vous répondre en français aussi, Ina, alors, comme vous voulez.
Bonjour, Ina.
Bonjour.
So, great presentation. I have a quick question for you. Now, with what I'm learning about OBAs, we can maybe see it as a risk sharing because
Yep.
let's say a manufacturer has a new promising drug,
Yep.
but the payer on their side say that they don't have enough data to promise the value. So, in your expertise, what do you think would be one best practice from both sides, so both from the payer and from the manufacturers, when engaging in OBAs to make sure that the risk is shared equally,
Yeah.
or that the collaboration goes well, basically?
That's a great question. And what we've seen is that the payment from a payer perspective, it's never upfront. It's when you reach a certain level of outcome. And that is a great way to share the risk. And oftentimes the risk is perceived as higher when the cost is high, right? It's not only just on the uncertainty of the clinical data. Pretty sure that if there's a little bit of a question on the certainty of the data, but is not as a expensive drug, perhaps there's more willingness to try it, but it's the combination of two that it needs conversations, and OBAs can manage that by. So a great way to mitigate that is just like the payment are coming as you're reaching positive outcomes or negative outcomes, depending on like the discount, right? So you're tied together.
A quick follow-up. So do you think that by having a pre-built package with RWE, perhaps PSP data, because we talked a lot about PSP, do you think that would put the payer into more confidence in accepting the risk and lowering their threshold of how they perceive the risk of the medication?
I don't necessarily have experience with that. I think we've all tried on negotiations to do that. I don't know if, I'm curious to know if someone has been successful. On my experience, it hasn't. It's still, whenever there's real world evidence, there's always something, okay, well, how is the data collected? Is this clean? It can never replace a phase 3. So perhaps over time there's more willingness to discuss that, but from my experience so far, it hasn't. So, thanks.
A question up at the front.
Hi, Ina.
Salut.
Do we have any idea of how successful these OBA proving the value of these treatment has been as of now?
I'm not sure, actually, and I was searching the literature to see if we've captured that, and the answer is I haven't found something. I do believe that in certain circumstances, it has brought a lot of value, and I think we need to identify the right product and to implement that type of agreement in place. What we are looking into right now in collaboration with Chris Cameron at Eversana is to look at the OBAs and the time to reimbursement to actually have some factual data on has it actually accelerated access, yes or no. In theory, yes, because it is implemented in early access programs most of the time. But for those that haven't been implemented in early access programs, has it actually accelerated? And a big question mark on Canada, I'm not sure it has. It's probably because, it takes quite some time, the back and forth, making sure you find the right infrastructure and all that. So, a great question. I haven't had the answer. I'd be happy to hear if someone has that answer. Very curious myself.
Thank you.
Time for one last question. Yeah, over here on the far side.
I got it, Mike. Thanks.
Okay.
So we've been hearing a lot about data connectivity issues in
Yeah.
Canada, right? And that's a barrier to implementing OBAs. What are experiences from Europe that we can take to enhance our potential data connectivity to facilitate OBAs?
I'm not sure the pathways they've utilized, because it's, for example, Spain, I believe it's in 2014, they put in place the infrastructure with EHRs and centralizing all the data. And keep in mind, Spain is a little bit like Canada. Everything is fractured with regions. So they've overcome that challenge, and they did it. And from there, they were able to implement those type of agreements and early access programs and assessing the outcomes of certain products over time. It's hard to say. It's also smaller countries. So it's a big question. Big question. Thank you, Will.
Great. So I'll invite the panel to come up, and please join me in thanking Ina Hassani.
Thank you.